you, and it's so lovely to be here today with such terrific advocates for social change. And it's great to be talking about social inclusion in this strange time we find ourselves in the era of social distancing. I think if the last few months have taught us anything, it really is about the power of community and the extent to which we as human beings really long for connection and belonging. The pandemic has impacted people in significantly different ways, from older people more susceptible to the disease, to younger people more susceptible to job losses, from those with secure jobs who are able to work from home, to those on various front lines, whether they be health, logistics, retail or service industries, often poorly paid and highly exposed. From those in migrant and newly arrived communities having difficulties accessing health and financial support information in their language, to those who live alone away from family or friends, or for those whose home is not a safe refuge but in fact a place of violence and abuse. It's clear that the pandemic has exposed major fault lines in our society. It's highlighted privilege and disadvantage, secure and insecure work, social inclusion and those on the margins. And it has exacerbated inequality. And so while my speech today isn't focused on COVID-19, I did want to situate us in this important moment and this context to really affirm that, to my mind, social inclusion has never been more important than it is right now. To ensure our emergency responses are considering those more vulnerable and at risk, to make sure our state's recovery doesn't leave anyone behind. And I think on a really human level, to understand that in times of fear and uncertainty, we need each other now more than ever. So it is so nice to be in a room full of people and to be connecting today. What I wanted to talk to you today was about the importance of inclusion in organisations and workplaces, and to focus on one of the biggest levers of inclusion, which is inclusive leadership. And I want to caveat what I'm saying by saying that you don't need to be in a formal leadership role to lead people or to have a positive influence or to be an agent of change, as Denver talked about earlier today. So as Denver said, through my work with KPMG, I've worked with this incredible diversity of organisations, and I love my job because I get to go and work with, sporting teams to police to university colleges. I worked for an international music corporation, and I was desperate to get a backstage pass to the Taylor Swift tour at the time, which did not happen. So it's not all perks, sadly. But in the world of diversity and inclusion, we often spend a lot of our time talking about diversity and neglect the critical lever of inclusion. And my favourite way of thinking about diversity and inclusion is thinking about that great quote that says, diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. So diversity is all of our efforts to attract people with different backgrounds and perspectives into the workplace, but inclusion is really our efforts to ensure that they're respected and valued and able to make a contribution. And it's critical that we focus on inclusion because you don't get the benefits of diversity just by getting diverse people through the door. You get the benefits when people are empowered to think differently and share the benefits of their unique background and experience. You get the benefits when people are included and respected and empowered. Inclusive organisations experience many benefits, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the research in this space, but organisations that are inclusive are typically associated with enhanced productivity and performance, increased innovation, improved employee engagement, and lower levels of discrimination. So, in short, creating an inclusive workplace is absolutely critical. But how do you do this? How can you take an organisation that's not particularly inclusive and really focus on enhancing that? Or how do you maintain inclusion in an organisation that's doing reasonably well on that front? And I think for all of us, we recognise the importance of leadership in this regard. And when we think about our own organisations, thinking about or reflecting on our own behaviour as a leader, asking questions like, are leaders role modelling inclusive behaviour, or do they inadvertently reinforce in-groups and out-groups in our organisation? Are leaders rewarding and promoting people who really reflect our values as an organisation? Or do you get a free pass on being a total jerk if you're a high performer? And I think the stuff in the news about AMP over the last couple of weeks really brings those questions to the fore around what you can get away with if you are a high performer in an organisation despite the espoused values. So are leaders creating the right environment for people to bring their whole selves to work? So thinking about inclusive leaders, and I appreciate that you might not be able to see that, so don't worry, I'm going to talk through it all. I just always feel like I need to bring slides in case I'm not interesting enough, but then when you put a slide together like that, it's not particularly engaging anyway. Consultants, what do we do? This is what we do all the time. The first attribute I would say that inclusive leaders tend to demonstrate is that inclusive leaders value difference. And they communicate that value and the importance of different perspectives that can bring to the business or the organisation. And they might show that value of difference in various ways, hiring people outside the industry, the sector, to bring fresh thinking, seeking different perspectives in meetings, and not expecting everyone to bring the same skills and experiences to the job or work in the same way. And when I think about valuing difference, I think about Abraham Lincoln and his famous team of rivals that he put together for his cabinet back in 1860 in the United States. So he thought he would lead best if he brought together smart people with different views to push him out of his comfort zone, and included in his cabinet the three men who ran against him for the nomination for president. The second attribute that inclusive leaders demonstrate is curiosity. Inclusive leaders are curious and interested in other people's background and experiences. It's difficult to be an inclusive leader if you don't take the time to get to know your people. And it's not about that surface level awareness, it's about understanding and communication. So that might be expressed by a leader taking time to get to know their people and how they work best, having an open relationship and strong lines of communication, and understanding different skills and capabilities of people in their team and what their aspirations are for new opportunities and development. At KPMG, we're always forming new teams all the time with new projects, and so we bring people together very quickly, work together quite intensely, and then disband and go form a different team for a different project. So we always have to get to know new team members and how they work very quickly. So we developed this thing called personas, where everyone fills out a PowerPoint slide, because again, we're consultants. But it has a bunch of different things about the person that it normally takes time to get to know, to get into a good working rhythm. So, mine might be, my name's Beth, I am not a morning person, you can call me whenever you like, but probably the best way to reach me is text. I'm very happy to collaborate with people, but probably need to go at various points in time and work by myself for a few hours to actually get something done. And all of those just little nuances and ways of working together so you can gel quite quickly as a team is quite useful. Other people have things like, I have to be home at this time every day, all of that kind of stuff. Just little things to help teams get to know each other, I think, can be quite useful to creating an inclusive environment and setting everyone up for success. A third attribute of inclusive leadership is self-awareness, which is really a critical part of emotional intelligence. So being aware of emotions in yourself and others, using that awareness to help manage behaviour and relationships. And I think some examples of self-awareness in good leaders are being a really good listener, not feeling like as a leader you need to be the person that's talking the most, recognising you might be biased in situations and finding ways to challenge that bias, and understanding that if you really want to know as a leader what your people are thinking, it's often best not to express your view first, but hold back and see what your people really think without fear or favour of what you might think. The fourth attribute is that inclusive leaders are open to new information, to new circumstances, to new people, different ways of doing things and change. Leaders who are open might reflect this by not being particularly wedded to a particular way of doing things or the way that things have always been done, seeking feedback from a diversity of people and constantly learning, sharing their own learning and development goals, and really focusing that no matter what level you are at, continual improvement is wonderful. A fifth attribute is inclusive leaders promote collaboration and value teamwork. So this might look like a leader or an organisation that incentivises and rewards collective effort and collaboration rather than individual performance, openly and transparently sharing information in a bid to bring down silos, and working to connect people to a broader organisational purpose. Many of you have probably heard some version of the fabled story about a janitor meeting President Kennedy at Cape Canaveral during the early days of NASA. The president supposedly asked the man, "What do you do?" to this man in a hallway with a broom, and he said, "Well, Mr. President, I'm helping to put a man on the moon." And there's some speculation as to whether this meeting did or did not take place, but there's a good reason that that story is commonly referred to, because it shows that a workplace that's motivated by a higher purpose is so critical to inclusion, collaboration and teamwork, that sense of being part of something bigger than just your job. The last element of inclusive leadership is to build relationships where people feel valued and respected. Inclusive leaders know that people work differently and understand what individuals need to perform at their best. So to tie up that those ideas of inclusive leadership, I just want to reflect that we commonly underestimate how much we moderate our behaviour and adjust who we are to fit into our workplaces. And to some extent, I think that moderation and adjustment is required, because on a personal level, I would probably turn up unwashed at 11 a.m. in Ugg boots every morning. So I think some adjustment is important. But as leaders and influencers and agents of change in our organisation, the last thing that we want to do is to attract diverse people into our organisations and inadvertently encourage them to completely homogenise and act the same as everyone else. A few years ago, I was talking to some of the most senior police women in the state, and they were reflecting on their career in the police as a very hierarchical, male-dominated organisation. And I asked them, how have you managed to get to the top, these very, very senior roles in an organisation where it is stacked against women in many ways? Both of them said at the exact same time, by acting the way the blokes do. And look, good on them for getting there, and I can completely understand that that would be the only option that they might have had. But what a loss for our police agency and our community that the only senior women in that leadership team had to conform to this dominant culture in order to succeed. And who knows what these women could have brought to the police agency if they were able to bring the benefits of their diverse perspective and to be their authentic selves in those roles. This is true of many people in many workplaces. Dominant organisational cultures and ways of working permeate us all in ways both conscious and unconscious. So the challenge I wanted to leave you with today is thinking about, from an organisation's perspective, if we're trying to be innovative and creative and dynamic and inclusive, how do we bring people from diverse backgrounds with different ways of thinking and different perspectives into our organisations and empower them to be themselves? And how can we, all of us in leadership roles, find a way to bring our own authentic selves to our work in a way that reflects who we really are in terms of how we act, how we relate, how we share, and how we lead? Thanks so much for having me today. Lovely to talk to you all.
Great. And